They say a single encounter can shatter or reshape your entire understanding of the world. Picture this. An upscale boarding gate at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, bustling with weary business travelers and excited vacationers. Among them stands a confident black woman dressed in a casual but stylish ensemble, unaware that in mere moments her dignity will be challenged by a single hateful comment. A flight attendant perched at the airplane door narrows her eyes and mutters, "Dress better next time." This passing remark isn't just rude, it's loaded with prejudice. But fate can be ironic, because in seconds, that very woman is whisked into the owner's suite. Ebony Watkins tugged the handle of her compact suitcase through the sprawling corridors of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the busiest airport in the world. She glanced at her phone screen, checking the time. She had left her apartment in Buckhead early enough to avoid any unexpected traffic on I-85. Yet the swirl of airport traffic and the endless lines at security always tested her patience. Her outfit was a simple, elegant wrap dress made from a breathable cotton blend, complemented by low heels that made walking easier. Although Ebony often wore business suits to corporate engagements today, was meant to be less formal. She was attending a potential philanthropic meeting in Chicago, less about impressing strangers with the stiff edges of a blazer, and more about connecting with people who wanted to do some real good in the world. Her hair, a cascade of natural curls, framed her face beautifully. Ebony's expression alternated between excitement and the subdued nervousness that always accompanied flying. As she navigated the concourse, she felt that familiar mix of anonymity and hyper-awareness that is unique to travel. It had been a few months since her last flight. She'd dedicated much of her energy to philanthropic efforts in her hometown after her father, William Watkins, announced the Watkins Foundation's new nationwide initiative. Ebony's father, a businessman who had made his fortune through visionary startups, had recently become an influential board member of a major airline. It was something Ebony rarely mentioned, not wanting to draw attention or special treatment. Finally, she found her gate. The overhead screen read, Flight 718 to Chicago O'Hare, Delta Airlines. A real name, a real airline. Though Ebony's father had joined the board only a few weeks prior, it was enough to make Ebony uneasy about people's reactions if they discovered her family ties. She believed in carving her own path, as she always had. The waiting area, typical of an early afternoon flight, was a melting pot of suits, t-shirts, families with children, and the sporadic backpacker leaning against a pillar. Ebony settled into a seat near the gate, carefully placing her carry-on bag at her feet. She observed the scene, an elderly couple rummaging through travel documents. A group of college students in matching hoodies, excitedly chatting about their trip, and an impeccably dressed flight attendant who was assisting an irate passenger off to the side. Before Ebony could immerse herself in an audiobook, an announcement crackled over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our boarding process for Flight 718 to Chicago in just a few minutes. Please ensure you have your boarding passes and identification ready. A hush of anticipation swept the crowd. People began to gather their belongings, subconsciously forming lines before the official boarding announcement. Ebony stretched and switched off her phone's music app. She never liked wearing earphones during the final boarding scramble. She preferred to stay alert, watchful of any changes or cancellations. A male attendant emerged from behind the gate's podium. He cleared his throat and tapped the microphone. Good afternoon, everyone. We are now ready to pre-board our passengers with disabilities and those who need extra assistance. Then we'll move to our first class and priority boarding. Thank you for your patience." Ebony's seat was in economy. She could afford better accommodations, certainly, but she found comfort in traveling inconspicuously. Her father's position might have landed her in any seat she wished, but Ebony had chosen not to mention her last name or any special privileges. With a philanthropic mission in mind, she saw no reason to set herself apart from the rest of the traveling public. Within minutes, her zone was called. Ebony rose, gathering her bag and phone. The boarding line snaked around the waiting area. She patiently queued her ticket in hand. The flight attendant at the gate entrance was a middle-aged woman, utiage a tight bun, a crisp uniform, and a name tag that read, Karen Robinson. Ebony noticed Karen seemed somewhat tense. Her lips were pressed together in a thin line, and she was repeatedly looking passengers up and down. Ebony dismissed it as standard flight stress. Finally, Ebony's turn arrived. She offered Karen her boarding pass, wearing a friendly smile. Karen looked up at Ebony, with cool eyes scanning her attire form top to bottom. The flight attendant's eyebrow arched slightly, but she said nothing yet. She scanned the boarding pass, then hesitated. "Is this your final destination? Miss Watkins?" she asked quietly. Ebony nodded. "Yes, heading to Chicago for a short trip." Karen's lips pursed. "All right. Have a nice flight," she said monotonously. Ebony could see judgment flickering across Karen's face, but she chose not to dwell on it. Maybe the flight attendant was just having a rough day. Inside the jet bridge, the hush of air conditioning offered some relief from the busy terminal. Ebony's heart thrummed with the familiar excitement of stepping onto a plane, the intangible sense of stepping into a different dimension. Tart would soon whisk her to another city. Entering the aircraft, Ebony was met with more staff, a cheerful male flight attendant, handing out disinfectant wipes, and another flight attendant, further inside, guiding passengers to their seats. Karen, however, seemed to have joined them just seconds later, standing at the aircraft door as if supervising the boarding process. Ebony offered a polite smile, which Karen barely returned. Rows 1 through 3 were first class with plush wide seats and a sense of spacious luxury. Past that, rows of economy seats stretched back, each row narrower and more cramped. Ebony made her way to row 17. She placed her carry-on in the overhead bin and slid into the window seat. She fastened her seat belt and tried to settle in. But as she adjusted the overhead vent, Ebony couldn't shake a strange feeling that someone was watching her. She glanced down the aisle and noticed Karen's arms folded, observing her from a distance. When Karen's eyes locked with Ebony's, the flight attendant quickly turned away, focusing on a family of 4, struggling to stow their backpacks. Ebony took a breath, telling herself she was being paranoid. Racism in this day and age was not gone, but she believed that people in service roles often tried their best to be impartial. Yet Ebony knew the sting of prejudice. She had felt it in boardrooms, restaurants, and sometimes in the smallest gestures at grocery store checkouts. Dismissing these instances could be exhausting. But Ebony also recognized that not every stare was steeped in bigotry. Sometimes it was confusion or sheer curiosity. She turned to her phone, replying to a few text messages. One was from her father. "Good luck with the meeting in Chicago, Ebony. Very proud of you. Sorry I can't be there. Love, Dad." Ebony felt a twinge of warmth. She typed back a quick response. "Thanks, Dad. Love you too. I'll let you know how it goes." The cabin lights flickered, and the pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. We're expecting a flight time of about 1 hour and 35 minutes to Chicago O'Hare. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and your carry-on luggage is stowed. Flight attendants, please prepare for departure." Passengers finished settling in, overhead bins clicked shut, and seatbelts were double-checked. Karen passed through the aisle, performing a final check. When she reached Ebony's row, she halted in front of Ebony, scrutinizing her attire again. Ebony felt the heat of that stare. A moment of silence stretched too long. Ebony cleared her throat. "Is everything all right?" she asked quietly. Karen forced a tight smile. "Yes, just making sure that you're complying with the dress code." "Dress code?" Ebony looked around. The passenger beside her wore sweatpants and a hoodie. Across the aisle, a man was in cargo shorts and flip-flops. Ebony was wearing a simple but decent wrap dress. Nothing flashy, but certainly not sloppy or inappropriate. Ebony's eyebrows knitted in confusion. "I'm not aware of any formal dress code for economy passengers." Karen's smile vanished. "Well, we have standards. Some people wear pajamas and treat this like a motel. Just, you know." Her voice trailed off. Then she spoke again in a lower tone. "Dress better next time." A cold rush swept over Ebony. The condescension, the subtle hostility. She took a slow breath, refusing to let anger overshadow her better judgment. "I'm dressed just fine," she replied calmly. Karen shrugged and moved on down the aisle. Ebony felt her hands trembling with the urge to respond more harshly, but she'd learned in life that controlling one's immediate reaction often disarmed bullies more effectively than an outburst. At same time, Ebony felt the all-too-familiar sting of microaggressions and discriminatory undertones. Ebony noticed a few passengers had overheard the exchange. A woman across the aisle gave Ebony a sympathetic look. Ebony half smiled, hoping to dismiss the tension. She was determined not to let one person's attitude ruin her flight. The plane taxied onto the runway, engines roaring. Ebony focused on the sensation of being pushed back into her seat as the plane surged forward for takeoff. The runway lights blurred into streaks, and within moments they were airborne. The grey tarmac and airport structures fell away beneath them, replaced by wide-open sky. Settling into cruising altitude, Ebony leaned back against the headrest. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to let the stress of that encounter slip away. She reminded herself that her life's purpose was bigger than petty conflicts. She had a philanthropic meeting waiting for her in Chicago, a chance to expand the Watkins Foundation's reach. If she succeeded, she'd help provide mentorship programs for underprivileged youth across multiple states. After a few minutes, Tay seatbelt sign turned off, and flight attendants began their routine. The male flight attendant, with a friendly smile, whose name tag read Thomas, came by with the drink cart offering water soda and snacks. Ebony thanked him for the snack pack and a ginger ale. Karen, however, remained at the front of the cabin, directing other flight attendants, seemingly avoiding Ebony's row. Ebony took small sips of her ginger ale, letting the fizzy sweetness wash away some of the bitterness from earlier. 15 minutes into the flight. Ebony. Ebony leaned over to retrieve her reading tablet from her bag under the seat. That's when the woman sitting next to her, a middle-aged lady with kind eyes and a warm smile, whispered, "I'm so sorry about what she said to you." Ebony glanced over, slightly startled. "Oh, it's okay," Ebony replied quietly. Though it really wasn't. "No, it isn't," said Tay woman, whose name Ebony would soon learn was Barbara Coleman. "I've been flying for business for almost a decade, and I've never heard a flight attendant comment on a passenger's clothing like that." Ebony gave a soft chuckle. "I guess there's a first time for everything." Barbara sighed. "It's none of my business, but Yuo handled that pretty gracefully." I would have been fuming. Ebony smiled, grateful for the validation. "I've learned it sometimes is better not to escalate, but thank you for speaking up." Barbara nodded, and they introduced themselves properly. They discovered they had a few things in common. Both were involved in philanthropy. Both had grown up in the South, and both were heading to Chicago for work. The connection lifted Ebony's spirits. She realized that for every rude person out there could be a supportive ally. About halfway through the flight, the plane hit mild turbulence. The captain's voice instructed everyone to remain seated. Flight attendants resumed offering snacks once the turbulence passed, working from the front to the back of the plane. Suddenly, Ebony noticed a quiet commotion near the front rows. Several passengers craned their necks to see what was happening. Karen was engaged in a whispered but heated conversation with Thomas. She seemed distressed, her face flushed. Moments later, Thomas made his way toward Ebony's row. He leaned down and spoke softly. "Ms. Watkins, could you please come with me to the front of the aircraft?" Ebony's pulse quickened. "Is there something wrong?" "No, ma'am," Thomas assured, forcing a polite smile. "We have a special seating arrangement for you. The captain requested it." Barbara gave Ebony a puzzled look, and Ebony shrugged. "All right." Ebony unbuckled her seatbelt, carefully stepped into the aisle, and followed Thomas. As they walked toward the front, Ebony passed row after row of curious faces. She noticed Karen standing near the first-class cabin, gripping the edges of a curtain that separated first class from the main cabin. Karen's expression was nothing short of horror and disbelief. Once Ebony reached the front, Thomas slid open the first-class curtain. He led Ebony into a smaller private space, right behind the cockpit, a suite Ebony hadn't seen before. The seats looked even more luxurious than typical first class. There was even a door that could close for complete privacy. It had the feel of an owner's suite, the type of seat usually reserved for top executives or VIPs. Thomas pointed to the seat. "Please make yourself comfortable here for the remainder of the flight," he said in a slightly awed tone, as though even he wasn't used to seeing such extravagance. Ebony's eyes widened. But how, she stammered. Thomas motioned for her to sit. Then in a low voice he explained, "We just received a message from the airline's corporate office. It stated you're to be accommodated in our top private suite, courtesy of Mr. William Watkins and the corporate board. Apparently the message was forwarded to the captain, who asked me to escort Yuo here." Ebony blinked, shocked. She realized her father must have discovered her flight details and arranged for a surprise upgrade. That was precisely what Ebony had tried to avoid, special treatment. Still, she couldn't deny the sense of quiet vindication after Karen's snarky remark. Karen hovered behind Thomas, her face stiff UTIH disbelief. She had no choice but to watch Ebony settle into the seat. Ebony could almost feel Karen's silent fury radiating across the few feet that separated them. The seat was plush, reclining to a near-flat position, with a retractable privacy door. Ebony sank into the luxury, still processing what had just happened. Part of her was annoyed that her father had meddled. Another part couldn't help but appreciate the sweet irony. She remembered Karen's words clearly. Dress better next time. Yet here she was, sitting in an exclusive suite. A hushed tension blanketed the area. Karen stepped forward, forcing a cordial tone. "Ms. Watkins, if you need anything. Champagne, a blanket, a pillow. Please let me know." Ebony could see the strain in Karen's face, the forced smile. It was obvious she wasn't pleased. Rather than being petty, Ebony decided to remain poised. "Thank you," Ebony replied softly. "I'll let you know if I do." Karen lingered. Finally she spoke in a halting manner. "Well, Watkins, why? I didn't realize." She trailed off, struggling to find the words. Ebony crossed her legs, maintaining composure. Didn't realize what exactly she asked, lifting an eyebrow just enough to convey her displeasure. The flight attendant's cheeks reddened slightly. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't realize you were with the Watkins family." It was a telling statement. Karen was essentially admitting that her standard of treatment would have been different had she known Ebony's status. Ebony pressed her lips together. "If you had known, would it have changed how you spoke to me?" Karen opened her mouth as if to respond, but then closed it. She mustered a half-hearted nod. "I apologize for any misunderstanding." Ebony considered pressing further, calling out the blatant prejudice behind the apology, but decided to let the moment breathe. "Apology accepted," she said, without warmth or animosity. She turned away to gaze out the small oval window, signaling the conversation was over. Karen slowly backed away, leaving Ebony in the hush of the private suite. The adrenaline that had spiked earlier was beginning to ebb, replaced by a complex swirl of emotions. Ebony couldn't help but think of others who might not have had the means or connections to assert themselves. She felt a renewed determination to use her influence for good. As Ebony reclined in the plush seat, memories drifted back to her childhood. She recalled the day her father, then just an aspiring entrepreneur, took her on her first plane ride. They flew in economy seats, saving every penny, even packing sandwiches to avoid buying expensive airport food. Ebony had worn her Sunday dress, excited at the prospect of flying for the first time. Even then, she remembered how some of the flight attendants treated them like second-class citizens, looking down at the child with big eyes who asked for a second bag of peanuts. Now everything was reversed. William Watkins, once an underdog, had soared to immense heights, and Ebony, his only daughter, was reaping some of those benefits, whether she asked for them or not. A flicker of gratitude intermingled with sadness. Yes, it was nice to have this suite. But Ebony was worried this perk would overshadow her real mission. She wanted to be recognized for her philanthropic work, not for her last name or her father's business dealings. Shortly after Ebony settled in, the plane encountered another patch of turbulence. The overhead bins rattled, and the seatbelt sign dinged on again. The pilot's voice came through instructing flight attendants to take their seats. Ebony braced herself, feeling the aircraft sway gently. When the turbulence subsided, Ebony noticed Karen occupying a jump seat near the front. The flight attendant's eyes were distant, her face drawn in worry. Ebony wondered if Karen was reflecting on her behavior. People rarely changed overnight, but Ebony suspected this incident might leave a mark on Karen's conscience, if she had one. Thomas peeked around form behind the curtain partition. He flashed an apologetic smile at Ebony. "Is everything all right here, Ms. Watkins? Can I get you anything?" Ebony shook her head. "No, thank you, Thomas. I appreciate your professionalism." Thomas nodded. "Just doing my job," he replied with modest humility. He retreated, leaving Ebony in a more comfortable quiet. After a while, Ebony felt her phone buzz in her pocket. Putting it in airplane mode had been standard, so she was surprised to see a notification pop up. It was an iMessage on the in-flight Wi-Fi. She realized the airline offered free Wi-Fi for certain first-class suites, and apparently she was connected now. The text was from her father. "Hope, You like the surprise upgrade. I know you didn't ask for it, but we can't let you fly coach while I'm on the board. Love you, Ebony." Ebony sighed. This was classic William Watkins behavior, quietly orchestrating grand gestures. She typed back a brief response. "Dad, you know how I feel about special treatment, but thank you for looking out for me." She leaned back, shutting her eyes. She needed to refocus on tech philanthropic meeting in Chicago. She planned to pitch an extension of the Watkins Foundation's literacy programs into Chicago's South Side. The plan was to partner with local churches' community centers and eventually city government offices. If successful, Ebony would replicate the model in Detroit, Cleveland, and beyond. But Ebony couldn't help replaying the earlier confrontation in her mind. Karen's attitude was a stark reminder of what people who looked like Ebony sometimes faced. An unspoken question tugged at her. Would Karen have spoken to a white passenger with the same dismissiveness? Ebony shook her head slightly. She already knew the answer. A discreet knock sounded at the small door of the suite. The captain himself, a broad-shouldered man with grey streaks in his hair, and the nameplate, Captain Higgins, poked his head in. "Ms. Watkins," he greeted in a respectful tone. "I just wanted to say hello and ensure everything is to your liking. We're honored to have you aboard. Your father and I go back a few years." Ebony was taken aback. She unbuckled and stood, offering a polite handshake. "Captain Higgins, thank you for making me comfortable. I appreciate it." He waved off the gratitude. "Not a problem at all. William is a wonderful man. We're thrilled to have him on the board. Please don't hesitate to let me know if there's anything you need." He glanced around the suite. "You're in good hands. Thomas is one of our best." Ebony nodded, forcing a small smile. She sensed the sincerity in the captain's voice, though she also felt the weight of the spotlight. Every crew member on this flight now likely knew who she was, or at least who her father was. This was the last thing Ebony wanted to broadcast. Captain Higgins left with a courteous bow of the head. Ebony sat back down, exhaling a long breath. She could almost see the rumor mill spinning in the minds of the flight attendants. This was supposed to be a routine flight, but it had become anything but. As the flight progressed, Ebony grew restless. The seat was comfortable, but her mind was buzzing. She decided to stroll toward the restroom at the front of the plane. When she stepped out of the suite, she spotted Karen leaning against the galley counter, her arms folded. Thomas appeared to be talking to her in hushed tones. Ebony caught a snippet of the conversation as she passed Karen. "You know, we can't treat passengers like that. It's not right, and it's not good for the airline." "Airline? She didn't do anything to you." Karen's voice trembled. "You don't understand, Thomas. If you grew up in my neighborhood, some of us were." She paused as she noticed Ebony approaching. The tension thickened. Ebony politely slipped past them without meeting Karen's eyes. Inside the compact lavatory, Ebony stared into the mirror. A storm of emotions raged behind her calm expression. She couldn't help but wonder about Karen's background. Sometimes people who lash out carry old wounds, prejudices passed down through generations or experiences that twisted their perspective. Still, Ebony knew that understanding someone's past didn't justify racism or discrimination. When she emerged, both flight attendants had disappeared. She returned to the suite, but her curiosity about Karen lingered. As Ebony settled back into the suite, the curtain rustled. Barbara Coleman. Ebony's seatmate from economy peeked in with a polite smile. "Hi," she said. Voice hushed. "I just wanted to see how you're doing up here." Ebony smiled warmly. "I'm all right, just surprised by all the fuss." Barbara nodded, stepping closer. I had no idea you were, related to the Watkins who joined Delta's board. I overheard a couple of people talking. Ebony sighed. I prefer to keep it low-key. Barbara chuckled softly. Well, you handled yourself with grace. I just wanted to say that. Even in economy, we're all talking about how that flight attendant singled you out. Ebony shrugged. It's not the first time I've encountered prejudice, but it still stings. Barbara placed a hand on Ebony's shoulder. I'm sorry you have to go through that. But I see you. Others do too. Ebony felt a swell of gratitude. Before she could respond, Thomas approached from behind. Barbara stepped aside. Thomas said quietly, Ms. Watkins, the captain, wanted me to let you know we'll be starting our descent into Chicago soon. If you could remain seated and fasten your seatbelt, we'd appreciate it. Barbara excused herself politely, heading back to her seat. Ebony thanked Thomas, then secured her belt. A subtle jolt signaled the aircraft beginning its descent. The pilot executed a smooth landing at Chicago O'Hare, rolling along the runway before taxiing to the gate. Ebony peered out the window at the vast expanse of the bustling airport. Her stomach fluttered with anticipation. She had a big day ahead, including meeting with local community leaders. After the cabin door opened, Ebony stood and collected her belongings. She braced herself for the awkwardness of the final goodbye WTIH, the flight crew. As she stepped out of the suite, Thomas was there with a polite bow. Thank you for flying with us, Ms. Watkins. It was an honor. Ebony smiled. Thank you, Thomas. Your hospitality was wonderful. Then Karen stepped forward, looking hesitant. Ms. Watkins. She began, her voice faltering. I just want to say again, I apologize for any offense. Ebony studied Karen. She saw fear, regret, and perhaps a glimmer of self-awareness in the flight attendant's eyes. Thank you, Ebony replied, not unkindly. I hope this is a learning moment for everyone. Karen nodded stiffly, stepping aside to let Ebony pass. Ebony walked down the jet bridge, resisting an impulse to glance back. She wanted to leave the tension behind her. A part of her suspected that Karen's world had just turned upside down. Another part hoped that the next time Karen interacted with a passenger who didn't look important, she'd think twice before judging them. Ebony navigated O'Hare's labyrinthine halls until she found her way to an exit. She hailed a taxi toward the south side, where a small community center awaited her presence. This was Ebony's real reason for flying, to expand the Watkins Foundation's after-school literacy programs. Inside the community center, Ebony was greeted by Ms. Darlene Brown, a local organizer who championed youth development. The building smelled of old library books and disinfectant, a comforting scent to Ebony. Posters for tutoring sessions, skill-building workshops, and upcoming community events lined the walls. Welcome, Ms. Watkins, Ms. Brown said with a wide smile. We're so thrilled to have you here. We've heard great things about the Watkins Foundation. Ebony shook her hand warmly. Thank you for meeting me. I'm really excited about partnering with this community. Let's see how we can collaborate. For the next 2 hours, Ebony discussed logistics funding, volunteer recruitment, and the unique challenges facing the neighborhood. She listened to teachers who struggled with limited resources, parents who juggled multiple jobs, and students who yearned for more after-school activities. Ebony's heart expanded with each story, fueling her determination to help. When the meeting concluded, Ebony promised to follow up with a detailed proposal. As she prepared to leave EMS, Brown asked, "Will you be staying in Chicago for a while?" Ebony shook her head. "I have to return soon, but I'll be back frequently, I assure you." The older woman smiled, placing a hand over Ebony's. "Thank you for not forgetting about communities like ours." Ebony swallowed a lump in her throat. "I never will." Back in a taxi heading to her hotel, Ebony's phone buzzed again. A text from her father. "Heard Yuo landed safely. How did Yuo like the suite?" "Let's talk soon," Ebony typed back. "I'll call you tonight. Meeting went well. Love you." She stared at the phone screen, mind drifting to Karen. The flight attendant's attitude had stung, but Ebony also recognized that her father's position had inadvertently forced Karen into a humbling moment. Ebony wondered, was the real issue that Karen was a racist, or was she simply prejudiced against people who didn't appear wealthy or powerful? Possibly both. Prejudice often wore many masks. Unbeknownst to Ebony, events were already unfolding at the airline's corporate headquarters. Captain Higgins had filed a report stating there had been a complaint regarding a flight attendant's rude and potentially discriminatory behavior toward a passenger who happened to be closely related to a board member. The report was standard procedure, but given Ebony's status, it quickly escalated to higher management. Karen found herself summoned for a meeting with the airline's Human Resources Department. She arrived feeling a mixture of dread and defensiveness. In a sterile conference room overlooking the airport tarmac, a stern-faced HR representative sat across from her. "Ms. Robinson, we have received a complaint regarding your interaction with Ms. Ebony Watkins. We'd like to understand your version of the events." Karen's mind raced. Should she lie and say Ebony was dressed provocatively or in violation of airline policy? But Ebony wasn't. Flight cameras and passenger testimonies would prove otherwise. Feeling cornered, Karen offered a half-truth. "I made a comment about dress code, which I realize was taken offensively. I didn't mean it in a racist manner, I was just concerned about passenger appearance." The HR representative's eyes remained cold. Given Ms. Watkins's attire was not inappropriate. Inappropriate. Why did you single her out? Karen swallowed. I was under stress. It was a busy flight. She couldn't bring herself to admit the underlying bias that had influenced her actions. After a lengthy interrogation, Karen was placed on suspension pending further investigation. A wave of panic flooded her. She knew how the airline prided itself on diversity and customer service. If found guilty of discriminatory behavior, she risked losing her job altogether. Ebony wrapped up her philanthropic work in Chicago over the next 2 days, visiting libraries and local churches. Each meeting reinforced her belief that the Watkins Foundation could make a significant impact on underprivileged communities if they did it right. She collected stories from librarians struggling to keep up with demand-form single parents who wanted better after-school tutoring options. Ebony felt her passion for this cause burning brighter than ever. On her final night in Chicago, Ebony dined with Barbara Coleman, the seatmate who had befriended her on the plane. They met at a small Italian bistro near Millennium Park. Over pasta and iced tea, they laughed about how they'd met under such tense circumstances. "You know, Ebony," Barbara said, swirling spaghetti on her fork. "What happened on that plane was awful. But I've seen so many people on social media praising your composure, especially after word got out that you were upgraded to the owner's suite." Ebony raised an eyebrow. "Social media I haven't checked." Barbara pulled out her phone, displaying a short video clip that a passenger had apparently taken. It showed Karen telling Ebony dress better next time, followed by Ebony being escorted to the private suite. The video had gone viral with thousands of comments calling out the stewardess's behavior and praising Ebony's quiet dignity. Ebony watched, feeling both mortified and vindicated. She never sought public attention for personal conflicts, but the incident was now a trending topic. Comments ranged from outraged condemnation of racism to praises for Ebony's poise. Barbara reached across the table. This might be a blessing in disguise. With this attention, maybe your foundation's work will gain more visibility. Ebony considered the point. Perhaps this was an opportunity. She didn't like how it came about, but if it helped more people learn about the Watkins Foundation's philanthropic efforts, maybe some good could come of it. Heading back to Atlanta, Ebony's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts about how to leverage the viral moment for positive change. She checked out of her hotel and arrived at O'Hare for her return flight. This time, Ebony had no illusions. She'd likely be recognized. Sure enough, as she approached the check-in kiosk, a polite young agent recognized her name. Oh, Ms. Watkins. Welcome back. We have UO on record here as a VIP passenger. We've upgraded you to first class for your return journey. We hope that's acceptable. Ebony sighed inwardly. She was uncomfortable with the constant upgrades based on nepotism, but challenging the staff about it here might create more chaos. She simply nodded. Thank you. When she arrived at the gate, a few other passengers whispered, glancing in her direction. It seemed the viral video had circulated among airline employees as well. Some looked at her with admiration, others with curiosity. Ebony did her best to remain calm and gracious. Karen wasn't on this return flight. Instead, Ebony was greeted by a different set of flight attendants, all of whom seemed determined to make her flight flawless. She overheard a conversation between two of them regarding the unfortunate incident with a stewardess who had been suspended. As Ebony settled into her seat, she kept her mind on bigger things. She didn't relish the idea of Karen losing her job, but Ebony also believed that accountability was crucial. People like Karen needed to recognize that their biases had real-world consequences. Back in Atlanta, Ebony's father insisted on meeting her at the airport. William Watkins was a tall man with a broad smile and gentle eyes, dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of success yet carried an air of humility. He enveloped Ebony in a big hug as soon as she emerged from baggage claim. "How's my philanthropic superstar?" he teased. Ebony rolled her eyes playfully. "Dad, please." "How's my meddlesome father who can't let me fly?" Coach William laughed heartily, but then his face turned serious. "I'm sorry if I overstepped. I just wanted to make sure you were safe and comfortable." Ebony sighed, linking her arm through his. "I know, Dad, and I do appreciate it. But you know how I like to handle things on my own." He gave a light squeeze. "I understand. But I heard about that flight attendant. I also heard about the video going viral. The airline is in damage control mode." Ebony nodded. "I've seen it. People are angry. How is the airline handling it?" "They're launching an internal review. I have a board meeting in a few days. Trust me, I'll be bringing up concerns about this. We're pushing for better diversity training, among other things." Ebony couldn't hide her relief. "That's good to hear." Days later, William Watkins sat in a stately boardroom with the airline's top executives. Plush leather chairs surrounded a glass table. Framed pictures of the airline's history adorned the walls. William's fellow board members included men and women who had been in the aviation industry for decades. The CEO cleared his throat. "William, we know you requested we address the situation regarding the flight attendant incident." Let's hear your concerns. William tapped the table gently. This incident has gone viral. It exposes a potential culture problem in our staff. We must ensure our employees are trained not just in customer service, but in recognizing and confronting their own biases. Racism, subtle or overt, can't be tolerated. A few board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One murmured, we already have a diversity program. William leaned forward. Clearly it's not enough. Training can't just be a checkbox. It has to be ongoing and meaningful. This is not just about my daughter. It's about every passenger who might not have someone powerful in their corner. Murmurs of agreement circled the table. The CEO nodded. Point taken. We'll initiate a more robust training program, and we're reviewing the flight attendants' conduct. We want to avoid any similar incidents in the future. William glanced around, satisfied that some measure of change was being set in motion. He knew progress might be slow, but at least the conversation was happening at the highest level. A week later, Ebony received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "Apology." She almost deleted it as spam, but curiosity won. Opening it, she found a message form. Karen Robinson. Dear Ms. Watkins, this is Karen, the flight attendant from your recent trip to Chicago. I found your business email through your foundation's website. I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I wanted to extend a sincere apology for my behavior. I realized my words and actions were unacceptable and hurtful. I've been placed on leave from the airline while they investigate. I'm not writing for sympathy, but to genuinely apologize. I've had time to reflect on my prejudices, and I'm deeply ashamed. Sincerely, Karen Robinson. Ebony reread the email twice. She felt a swirl of emotions. Anger, empathy, wariness. She decided to sleep on it before responding. By morning, Ebony composed a measured reply. Dear Ms. Robinson, thank you for reaching out. I accept your apology. I hope this experience prompts you to reflect on how words can affect others. I'd encourage you to consider volunteer work or diversity training to better understand different perspectives. We all have biases, but it's our responsibility to challenge them. I wish you the best moving forward. Sincerely, Ebony Watkins. She hit send, feeling a strange mix of relief and closure. Whether Karen truly learned from this was yet to be seen. But Ebony had taken the high road and spoken her truth. Ebony Watkins hadn't set out to become a symbol. Her mission had always been focused, rooted in grassroots impact and community development. But ever since that flight and the viral video that captured it, her world had subtly shifted. Strangers recognized her in coffee shops. Emails flooded her foundation's inbox. Media requests came in almost daily. But amid the noise, something quieter and more powerful was unfolding. Change. In response to mounting public pressure and TH media spotlight, the airline officially announced its new internal initiative, the Inclusive Flight Experience. It was more than a PR bandage. It was a serious structural overhaul. For the first time, Skyfair Airlines mandated that every employee, from gate agents to senior cabin crew, participate in recurring training on cultural sensitivity, implicit bias, and equitable service protocols. Ebony had been hesitant when the airline's PR team first approached her about participating in a promotional campaign. She wasn't interested in being a token or a headline. But after several calls and a heartfelt conversation with Vanessa, a corporate diversity officer who had quietly supported her behind the scenes, she agreed on one condition. I'll do it, Ebony had said, but only if it's about more than me. This story isn't just mine. It belongs to every traveler who's been judged, profiled, or made to feel like they don't belong. And so with full creative input, Ebony helped craft a short video campaign. The camera captured her, standing inside a quiet terminal, her voice calm but firm. Respect doesn't start at 30,000 feet. It begins at the gate, she said, looking directly into the lens. Every traveler deserves to be seen, not wised up, not dismissed. Seen. The campaign launched across airline platforms, social media, and in-flight screens. And the response was overwhelmingly positive. Viewers praised the campaign's sincerity. Airline employees commented that the new training sessions were challenging, but long overdue. Passengers who had felt voiceless finally saw their experience reflected on screen. Ebony's foundation saw a measurable surge in donations and volunteer inquiries. People who had never heard of her work now wanted to contribute to the programs she'd been building for years: literacy hubs, mentoring programs, and leadership boot camps for underserved youth. And back at the Chicago Literacy Center she had visited just weeks earlier, a new mural was being painted in the hallway. It featured children reaching for books that floated like stars. One of the figures bore a slight resemblance to Ebony, though the artist never officially confirmed it. Ebony was humbled by the momentum, but she remained clear-eyed. This wasn't a victory lap, it was a reminder of how far there still was to go. Bias doesn't vanish with a video. Equity doesn't come from a headline. But awareness, that's where it begins. And sometimes, all it takes to create ripples of change is one woman choosing dignity over outrage and action over silence. For Karen Robinson, the weeks following the incident felt like a free fall with no parachute. What began as a dismissive comment to a passenger had unraveled into a corporate investigation, public backlash, and internal scrutiny, unlike anything she had ever faced in her long career. She'd always seen herself as a seasoned professional, strict yes, but fair. But now the reflection in her bathroom mirror told a different story, a woman caught in the grip of her own unchecked biases. The airline had suspended her from duty almost immediately after the viral clip surfaced. Though she hadn't been formally terminated, the silence from colleagues, the HR summons, and the sudden change in tone from her supervisors painted a bleak picture. At first, Karen tried to justify what happened. She told herself she hadn't meant it that way, that she had simply been enforcing standards, that the passenger had overreacted. But the evidence didn't lie. The camera didn't lie. And the voice that had come out of her own mouth, the sharp tone, the smug judgment, couldn't be defended once it was played back in front of a review panel. The real gut punch came when her route schedule was updated. Red eyes, low traffic, regional flights, awkward layovers, and no more senior perks. It wasn't a firing, but it was a clear message her reputation had collapsed, and so had her standing. Some co-workers avoided eye contact. Others offered awkward sympathy. But most just kept their distance. The ones she considered allies had gone quiet. And as for management, their patience had run dry. At home, the stress took a toll. She found herself snapping at her husband, withdrawing from her adult children. Even watching the news became unbearable, especially when her name, blurred but still recognizable, flashed across television screens during coverage of airline reform. In a rare moment of clarity, Karen found herself sitting on the edge of her bed, crying not out of anger, but because she couldn't stop replaying the moment. The dismissive glance, the words, "Dress better next time," the smugness, the power play. It wasn't a mistake in protocol, it was a failure of character. That night she did something she never thought she'd do. She looked up local community centers and found a racial reconciliation initiative that offered workshops on implicit bias. The next day she showed up late, anxious, and unsure of what to expect. But she sat through the discomfort, through the defensiveness, through the realization that she wasn't the victim in this story, she was the lesson. It was the beginning of something difficult, but necessary. Karen's karma hadn't just cost her status, it had stripped away the illusions she clung to, and in their place, she now faced a sobering truth. Redemption isn't given, it's earned, and it begins the moment you stop defending the indefensible. Whether she would rebuild form here remained to be seen. But for once, she wasn't looking away. Several months had passed since the flight that had thrust Ebony Watkins into an unexpected spotlight. Since then, she had spoken on panels, expanded her foundation's outreach, and quietly watched as the airline reevaluated its internal policies. But now the noise had softened, the headlines had faded, and Ebony found herself once again at an airport gate preparing for a trip tut would she hoped be entirely ordinary. The youth conference in Los Angeles promised to be inspiring, an event dedicated to mentorship, equity, and innovation. Ebony was one of the keynote speakers, but as she wheeled her modest carry-on through the familiar corridors of Hartsfield-Jackson, she had only one wish to fly, as just another passenger, not a viral figure or a board member's daughter. At check-in, her name corked brief attention. A gate agent offered an automatic upgrade. Ebony smiled and politely declined. "I'm good in economy today. Just looking for a quiet flight." The agent blinked, surprised but respectful. "Of course, Ms. Watkins. Have a wonderful trip." She made her way down the jet bridge and found her seat in row 22. It was beside a young college student deeply immersed in a thick biology textbook. Ebony offered a polite smile before settling in. No one stared. No phones pointed her way. No whispers lingered in the air. Just the soft buzz of normalcy she'd longed for. As the plane taxied toward the runway, she glanced around the cabin. A flight attendant walked by an older gentleman, boutique, a calm energy nod, a gentle smile. He offered her a snack basket. "Pretzels or cookies, ma'am?" "Pretzels, please," Ebony replied. He nodded, handing them over. "Welcome aboard." No comments on her appearance. No double takes, no tension, just service. As the aircraft lifted into the sky, Ebony looked out the window. Clouds parted to reveal endless blue, and sunlight spilled across her face. She leaned back, letting the hum of the engines soothe her. For the first time in months, she felt the peaceful stillness of being anonymous. She thought of Karen Robinson, where she might be now, whether she had taken those difficult first steps toward change, whether she had chosen reflection over resentment. Ebony didn't know and perhaps never would. But she hoped Karen had listened, had learned, because that, too, was part of justice, not just the consequences, but the chance to grow. Ebony closed her eyes. She was no longer angry, only resolute. What had begun as a moment of humiliation had rippled into something larger, reform awareness, and a deeper personal calling. The work ahead was still vast, but this flight, this simple, quiet, unremarkable flight, felt like a healing step. Above the clouds, Ebony carried with her more than a suitcase and a speech. She carried a mission, one born of turbulence, one powered by purpose, and this time she was soaring on her own terms. Thank you so much for journeying with us through this turbulent yet transformative story. Ebony. Ebony. Watkins reminds us that standing firm in dignity and compassion can illuminate hidden prejudices in our everyday lives. We saw how one flight attendant's discriminatory remark unleashed a storm, but also paved the way for positive change from a heartfelt apology to a broader conversation about inclusion. If this story moved you, consider how a single act of kindness or a single moment of bias can leave ripples in someone's life. Let's work together to make those ripples ones of empathy, growth, and unity. Like, share, and subscribe so we can bring more stories that challenge our perspectives, inspire us to do better, and remind us of our shared humanity. Your support helps keep these important conversations alive. Join us next time, and until then, stay compassionate and curious.